Продовжуємо роботу в Українському кризовому медіа-центрі. Зараз говоритимемо на тему «Відмова від правосуддя, розслідування».
Now we're going. They deny the investigation of the assassination of Pavlo Sheremeta in Ukraine did not give any result. Our speakers will be Nina Ognianova, coordinator of CPJ's Europe and Central Asia program; Jill Simon, executive director of the Committee to Protect Journalists; Christopher Miller, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty; Alan Rusbridger, board of directors of the Committee to Protect Journalists, former editor-in-chief of The Guardian, London. Dear colleagues, please take the floor.
Is it good? No. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, can everyone hear me? Good morning. I'm Joel Simon. I'm the Executive Director of the Committee to Protect Journalists. I want to thank all of you for attending the launch of our new report. It's called Justice Denied. Here's a copy. Ukraine comes up empty in the probe of Pavlo Sheremeta's murder. And we'll hear in a moment from the report's author. He's here, Christopher Miller, along with Nina Ognianova. She's our CPJ's program coordinator for Europe and Central Asia. And we'll also hear from CPJ board member Alan Rusbridger. But before we hear from Alan, I want to introduce some special guests. Pavlo's mother, Ludmila, is here with us. Here from Minsk. Pavlo's daughter Elizaveta is here. She's here from Moscow. And I would also like to welcome Elena Pritula, who is Pavlo's partner and owner of Ukrainska Pravda, where Pavlo, of course, was a columnist. I just want to say to all of you how much I admire your courage and how honored I am to work shoulder to shoulder with you, side by side, this week and in the future in the pursuit of justice. It's an honor to be with you. And now I'd like to invite Alan to say a few words.
Well, good morning. I'm Alan Rusbridger. For 20 years, I edited The Guardian, and now I'm a proud board member of the CPJ. This time last year, I was in Kenya for the CPJ, following up on the death of a very brave editor, John Kituyu, who died when somebody broke his skull with a rock. This week, it's Ukraine and the murder of another remarkable journalist, Pavlo Sheremeta, blown up nearly a year ago. In neither case have the killers been brought to justice. That failure conveys a sense of impunity, that it's okay to kill journalists or threaten them or bully them or intimidate them. This is not a news story. People in power have never liked journalists. They've always found ways of silencing them. But today, around the world, silencing increasingly doesn't mean locking up or menacing or using repressive laws. It means literally that, forcing their silence through death. Fortunately, journalists around the world have a sense of feeling. If you kill one of us, it's a matter of respect, self-respect, and respect to our colleagues and to the job that we do to make as much noise as we can. That's all we can do, and that's what we're doing today. We're making as much noise as we can, and we hope you will do the same. Ukraine has got a good record for independent media. We know that. And we know that the country lives in troubled times. But it's not okay to blow up a journalist in broad daylight in your capital city. And it's not okay to fail to find out who did it. We would raise this case of any journalist thus murdered. But as it happened, Pavlo Sheremeta represented the best of journalism. He was courageous, tough, knowledgeable, warm, compassionate, and unflinching. We don't know yet who killed him. We understand the complexities of uncovering the murderers. But we're here to say it really matters that they're found. And here's why it matters. Societies can't progress or learn or improve or develop without facts, without knowing what is true and what isn't true. Journalists are not the only people who can help us establish facts, but journalists are at their best remarkably good at it. Now, journalism, we know, is threatened by the digital revolution and some urgent, yet to be worked out questions about the economic model of what we do. But now is the moment to defend, cherish, protect, and celebrate the people and organizations who bring us those facts, often in the face of great personal danger. The second reason it really matters is that when you kill a journalist and no one is caught, it creates fear. Perhaps that's what the killers wanted. And we've seen fear in Kiev this week. We've met journalists, brave journalists, quietly admitting that they're now censoring themselves, not doing this story or asking those questions. They don't understand why Pavel was killed. Perhaps it could be them next. That's understandable. It's human. But it's also deeply worrying. As outsiders, you wouldn't want that in Kenya, though it's happening there too. And surely you don't want that here in Ukraine, a country with such a potentially strong and vibrant future. Some of the journalists we've spoken to feel very alone after Pavel's murder. They've told us that, sadly, there has not been the united support within the Ukraine for what they do or for how they are struggling to keep going. They have told us that in the face of Russian aggression, some in our profession feel they are being asked to choose between being patriots and journalists. I too know the sting of that question. After publishing the Edward Snowden revelations in The Guardian, I was brought to Parliament in London and demanded, did I love my country? The implication was that I was betraying Britain by writing about the collection of all our personal data on a previously unimaginable scale. And my reply was, the reason I loved my country was because it allowed free speech. And I think that should be the same here. That Ukraine's tradition of independent media is something that helps define who you are, is something to defend and be proud of. Journalists, if the word means anything, have to remain independent of everyone, especially of the state. They cannot allow the government of the day to define the public interest. And this applies even in times of conflict or war, perhaps especially in times of conflict or war. The Guardian vehemently repudiated the British invasion of Suez in 1956. We were denounced, we lost advertising, we lost readers, but history now says we were right. And there are innumerable such examples through history and around the world. We're here today because the law agencies have, after a year, failed to find the killers of a truly independent journalist, someone who did understand what the role of journalist was in society. I have to say it's not a happy story. No one, I think, and we've spoken to a lot of people in the past week, feels proud of the lack of success over the past year. My CPJ colleagues will shortly go into more detail about what we've discovered and what we propose. But there are two bright lights in the story. One is the remarkable film, Killing Pavel. Pavel's former friends and colleagues honored him by investigating his death. And what a remarkable job they made of it. That film spurred the investigating authorities into new actions, and we fear cast some doubt on the thoroughness of the official inquiries. Someone tried to silence journalism, and journalists refused to be silenced. They responded to the killers with more journalism. They used journalism back against the killers. How truly inspiring that was. And the second bright light are the journalists we've met in Kiev who are so brave, so resourceful, so serious, so too true to journalism and why it matters. And I really wish I could bottle what you're doing and take it back to London and other places where some people have lost sight of the raw power of and need for good journalism. So there is hope. There is a year on sadness, there's frustration, but there's also celebration. It is, it seems to me, a time for Ukrainian journalists to unite over this cause. I'm sure there are many things that divide you, but this thing must surely unite you. Who killed Pavlo Sheremeta? We need to know. Ukraine, if it is to be the country it wants to be, needs to know. The world needs to know. It's that important, and that's why we're here today. And now I'm going to ask Chris Miller to come up. He's the author of the report, and he's just going to talk you through what he discovered in the writing of that report.
All right. Good morning. I'm Christopher Miller, the author of the report, and as many of you know, an American journalist who's lived and worked in Ukraine for several years now, more than seven to be exact. I began work on this report at the end of January after being contacted by the group that you see here from CPJ, and at that point it had been 6 months already since Pavlo was assassinated in broad daylight, not far from where we are today. I'll borrow a little bit from the report now in summarizing my findings for you. From the start, my goal here was not necessarily to solve the murder of Pavlo Sheremeta, which, as you know, has proven to be a very difficult task, but to conduct an examination of the investigation of his killing. I've been here long enough to know well about Ukraine's troubled history of incomplete investigations into attacks and murders in particular on journalists. What I found in this case was also troubling, and thank you. I'll slow down now. What I found in this case was also troubling. The case has gone cold. No motive has been confirmed. A significant amount of time and manpower has been devoted to pursuing so-called tracks that are based on little or no evidence, while there are some leads that have been paid less attention. The killers seen on security camera footage planting the bomb have not been identified, let alone apprehended by police. Crucial video evidence surfaced thanks only to the investigative journalists from the OCCRP and Slistvo Info. The agencies involved in the probe have each accused each other of destroying video evidence and obstructing each other's work. Potential witnesses and Sheremeta's colleagues say investigators have not closely questioned them. For the failures of investigators, dozens of people, including Pavlo's family, friends, and journalist colleagues with whom I spoke for this report, blamed authorities' incompetence, negligence, or sabotage, or a combination of all three. All of this raises serious questions about the investigators' ability, credibility, motivation, objectivity, and transparency. What we have today with the Sheremeta case is an incomplete investigation that has produced few results beyond those first achieved in the hours after Pavlo's brazen murder last July 20th. I'll hand it over to Nina now, who, on behalf of CPJ, will provide you with some recommendations that they came up with after the completion of the report.
Thank you, Chris, for the summary. And thank you all for coming here. CPJ is a press freedom advocacy organization, so apart from laying out the problems of the investigation, we offer recommendations to help advance justice. CPJ's report delivers two main sets of recommendations to the Ukrainian authorities and the international community. CPJ is calling on officials to reinvigorate the investigation by focusing on Sheremeta's journalistic work in Ukraine as the possible motive for the crime, and substantively following up on the findings of any parallel independent investigation into the murder. We are also calling on the media to provide, we're also calling on the investigation to provide regular substantive progress reports to the public and to communicate regularly with the media to promptly respond to interview requests about the investigation into the murder. We call on President Poroshenko to condemn threats and attacks against journalists in Ukraine and to ensure that they are effectively investigated. We called on him to publicly reaffirm the important role that a critical, independent press plays in Ukrainian society, and to denounce the practice of dividing journalists into patriotic or unpatriotic. We discussed those recommendations with the President yesterday. We call on both Russian and on Belarusian governments to cooperate fully with the investigation into Sheremeta's murder and to facilitate access to investigating officials to pursue any and all leads to the case in their respective countries. We also ask the Belarusian government to posthumously restore Pavlo Sheremeta's Belarusian citizenship. We outline recommendations to the European Union and the Council of Europe leaders, and our delegation will press European diplomats in scheduled meetings here in Kiev during the EU-Ukraine summit, which will take place this week. This week, our delegation and representatives of the three main agencies investigating Pavel's killing, the Prosecutor General's Office, the National Police, and the National Security Service of Ukraine. We met with all of them. We pressed them on our concerns, and we were quite disappointed that we were not able to learn any new advances in the investigation. In all of our meetings, we conveyed our concerns about the lack of trust in the investigation, and the investigating agencies acknowledged that this is an issue. We brought up the fact that to this day it remains unclear who surveilled and threatened Ukrainska Pravda's staff in advance of the murder, and who was responsible for following Pavlo Sheremeta and Olena Pritula in the months before Pavel's killings. None of these three agencies with whom we met gave us an answer. Moreover, we were not reassured that these threats are now being actively investigated. We asked all of these agencies about the role of the former SBU agent Igor Ustimenko in the crime. And other than saying that they had checked the circumstances of the presence near the murder scene, investigators said they had confirmed his alibi, that he had been hired by a client to provide private security, but they provided no details that would give us confidence in their conclusions. We could not get a clear and consistent answer to some basic procedural questions. For example, who is in charge of this investigation? Is it the Prosecutor General? Is it the head of the National Police? One agency told us it's the former, another agency that it was the latter. We need clarity and a single point person who is accountable for delivering justice. We need to know who this is. When we asked representatives of the SBU whether the agency was investigating the members of the Azov battalion who met with Sheremeta the night before the murder, we were informed that the SBU role is to support, to play an auxiliary role in the investigation and to support other agencies with requests for information, and that it does have an independent role. Thus, our question was referred to the national police officials, but when we asked them, they were vague in their response, only saying that all possible leads were being checked out. We recognize that Pavlo Sheremeta's murder investigation is a complicated investigation. It is a contract-style murder which is committed against the backdrop of Ukraine's complicated political reality. Investigators told us that the Sheremeta murder case consists of hundreds of volumes, and each of these volumes contains hundreds of accumulated data. And they repeatedly stated that they consider the case a priority for them and for the country, and that they are working very hard to solve it. Yet, a year after the killing, there are no identified suspects, no arrests, no prosecutions, and no justice delivered. We expect more than hard work. We expect results. The continued impunity in Pavlo Sheremeta's case is not only a press freedom issue. It is a rule of law issue. An EU-Ukraine summit starts in Kiev today, and Ukraine's reform process is part of the agenda. If Ukraine is genuine in its commitment to EU principles, it must demonstrate clear progress in solving Pavlo Sheremeta's case. And for its part, the EU must make solving this case an immediate priority and set it as a benchmark for assessing the success of Ukraine's reforms. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much, Nina. And as you've heard, we had a chance to meet with representatives from all three agencies involved in the investigation into the Sheremeta murder: the General Prosecutor's Office, the National Police, and the SBU. And we also had a chance to meet yesterday with President Poroshenko. There are 3 bits of positive progress resulting from our trip, and I'd like to share them with you today. Firstly, in our meeting with President Poroshenko, the President proposed incorporating an internationally recognized investigator into the national team. This would be with the approval of the Sheremeta family. The creation of such a mechanism would require the support, obviously, of Ukrainian civil society, but it could add heft and an element of independent oversight to the investigation. Secondly, all of us here are familiar with the Killing Pavlo documentary. Alan and Chris both mentioned it. It was released in May, of course. And that documentary used surveillance footage and investigative techniques to uncover new details about the crime, details that had eluded government investigators. We learned during our visit that the team that produced the documentary have agreed on a trial basis to share information with government investigators and vice versa. The purpose is to help advance the investigation and potentially provide some independent oversight. Finally, we were able to confirm this morning that representatives from both the National Police and the General Prosecutor's Office are considering a press conference on July 20th, the anniversary of Pavlo's killing. We sincerely hope they will go ahead because there are a number of questions that remain unanswered from all of our meetings, questions that Nina outlined in her remarks, and we hope that those of you in this room have an opportunity to ask the authorities. The first is, quite simply, who is in charge of this investigation? We believe that the investigation needs a single person with clear accountability, as well as the necessary resources and political support and independence in order to succeed. The second question we have is who surveilled Ukrainska Pravda and intercepted their communications in the weeks before Sheremeta's killing. The SBU denied point blank to us that they were involved in this. So who was it? Journalists in Ukraine will not feel safe until the authorities provide answers. The third is why have authorities not released the clear image they possess of the woman who planted the bomb under Pavlo's car? It seems logical that the authorities would want to enlist the public to try and find her. Isn't it now time to appeal for wider help in identifying this woman? These are some questions that we have for the authorities, but of course, you undoubtedly have some questions for us, and we are happy to take them now.
Шановні колеги, хто має запитання, будь ласка, представляйтеся і адресуйте.
Dear colleagues, if you have any questions, please introduce yourselves. And Alexandra Titrova, ICTV. You said that in your report you said that we need to pay attention. The law protecting bodies need to pay attention to the publications by Pavlo Sheremeta in Ukraine. In your recommendations to the law protecting bodies, you said that more attention should be paid to the publications by Pavlo Sheremeta in Ukraine. Maybe the law protecting body focus on the Russian track, and maybe the Russian publications became a reason of killing Pavlo Sheremeta. Why do you pay attention to Pavlo Sheremeta's publication in Ukraine?
Nina, you may want to add to this, but the basic answer to that is we asked for some evidence, some indication to support the theory about the Russian track, and authorities could not provide any. There's simply no evidence to support this. It may be true, it may not, but they have no evidence. And that a year after the crime, if they have no evidence, that sends a clear indication. So we think they need to look at all possible avenues, and there's no way to ignore the fact that there's some evidence which suggests political crime carried out here in Ukraine. That has to be seriously investigated. Nina, do you want to add to that? Do you have your mic?
Well, I think that really all the possible motives for this crime should be investigated. But the indication is that there is at least a tendency of this investigation to focus on the Russian trace, and we want to ensure that the Ukraine professional activity is also considered as with an equal weight.
Questions?
Next question, please. Шановні колеги, чи є ще запитання?
Dear colleagues, do you have any other questions?
Much time has gone by. It's been almost a year. Obviously, you've identified a lot of problems, things that weren't done. Looking at what's available and seeing what's there, how realistic do you think it is to have a conclusion, to have a trial, to come up with something conclusive if recommendations are followed? What are the limitations and possibilities at this point? Thank you.
Well, I'm not going to predict the future. Only the authorities can solve this crime. It's up to them. It's up to Ukrainian authorities. I wouldn't be here if I didn't have hope. I believe they are capable of solving this crime. I believe it's a matter of political will. And that's why we're here doing what we're doing. And that's why we're going to continue to do what we're doing. We're going to continue to put all the pressure that we can put on the authorities. Look, I've been doing this work for a long time. When there's a political crime, the resolution of the crime requires political will. The leadership needs to show that political will. They will only do so if Ukrainian society and the international community apply consistent pressure over a long period of time. I can promise you we're not going to go away. I can't tell you if the crime will be solved. We won't be satisfied until it is.
The next question, please. Колеги, чи з'явилися у когось
Dear colleagues, do you have any questions?
питань? Більше немає.
If there are no more,
Understand that a number of people would like to do one-on-one interviews. We will stay here and do those interviews. Anyone who would like to speak to us, we're happy to do that.
And if I can just add, we brought copies of the report for everyone. The report, the print copies are in Ukrainian, but online at our website, it's downloadable in 3 languages, Russian, English, and Ukrainian. And we have some materials on how to better defend, for journalists to better defend themselves, for their physical safety, their digital safety, and their psychological safety from our team on emergency response. And we also have a copy of the press release that accompanies our report in Ukrainian. So please come and get some of these. Oh. Okay.
Excuse me for my Russia, but I will speak in Russian. У Павла
Pavlo,
So Pavel believed that force is in truth. And today, I would like to express my deep gratitude to the Committee of Protection of Journalists and representatives of this committee for their actions, for their activities in order to bring the truth about what happened and who behind this, that this truth will be revealed in Ukraine. I didn't have the opportunity to publicly express my deep gratitude to Ukrainian people and bow my head. Those simple people who love my son, who came to say farewell, they kneeled, and I'm ready to kneel. And I want to wish you health. Please go on and continue to live. So if there are no more questions now, you can put your questions, and if you want to ask something, please. No questions. So this is the end of official part, and now we are going to communicate off the records.